The morning sun cast long shadows across the military cemetery as Commander Jake Morrison stood silently before a simple granite headstone. His dress blues were perfectly pressed, his medals catching the early light, but something felt incomplete about this moment. The headstone bore no military rank, no service decorations, just a name and dates that seemed too brief for a life cut short. Sarah Chun had been 26 when she died in Afghanistan. The official records listed her as a civilian contractor, killed in a vehicle accident outside Kandahar. But Jake knew better. He had been there that day, leading a classified operation that officially never happened, with a sniper who officially never existed. 3 months earlier, Jake had been briefing his SEAL team for what intelligence called a routine reconnaissance mission. The target was a Taliban stronghold in the mountains, suspected of harboring a high-value asset. Standard procedure called for a small team insertion, gather intelligence, and extract without engagement. But nothing about that mission would prove standard. The briefing room was cramped and humid, filled with the quiet tension that preceded dangerous operations. Jake spread aerial photographs across the metal table, pointing to key terrain features and potential extraction points. His team gathered around, studying the images with the focused intensity of men whose lives depended on understanding every detail. Primary objective is intelligence gathering, Jake explained, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. Something about this mission felt different, though he couldn't articulate why. We go in quiet, observe the compound, document personnel and activities, then extract before dawn. Petty Officer Martinez raised his hand. Sir, what about Overwatch? That compound sits in a bowl with high ground all around. If we're compromised, we'll be sitting ducks. Jake had been wondering the same thing. The tactical situation was less than ideal, with limited cover and multiple escape routes that could be easily blocked. Traditional sniper support would require positioning assets days in advance, something their timeline didn't allow. That's where our situation gets interesting, Jake replied, pulling out a classified personnel file. We're getting specialized support from someone not on the official roster. The file contained minimal information. Sarah Chun, age 26, civilian contractor with specialized skills in long-range precision shooting. Her background was heavily redacted, but the few details available were impressive. Former Army marksman, top of her class at sniper school, multiple deployments with special operations units before transitioning to civilian status. A contractor? Sergeant Williams frowned. Sir, with respect, we don't know this person's capabilities or reliability under pressure. Jake understood the concern. SEAL teams operated on trust built through shared training and combat experience. Introducing an unknown element, especially a civilian, created variables that could prove deadly. But the mission parameters left few alternatives. I had the same reservations, Jake admitted, but her service record speaks for itself. 3 confirmed kills over 800 meters, 0 mission failures, and recommendations from multiple special operations commanders. What the file didn't mention, and what Jake had learned through unofficial channels, was why Sarah Chun had left military service. The details were murky, involving a conflict with superior officers over rules of engagement and civilian casualties. She had been quietly encouraged to resign rather than face formal disciplinary action. The team spent the next 4 hours reviewing tactical plans, contingency procedures, and communication protocols. Sarah Chun would position herself on a ridge approximately 1,000 meters from the target compound, providing overwatch and precision fire support if needed. Radio contact would be maintained through encrypted channels, with predetermined signals for various situations. As the briefing concluded, Jake found himself studying Sarah's photograph again. She appeared younger than her age, with serious dark eyes and black hair pulled back in military regulation style. Nothing in the image suggested the deadly precision that had earned her reputation among special operations units. That afternoon, Jake drove to a remote training facility outside Bagram Airfield to meet their sniper support. The facility was little more than a collection of prefabricated buildings and shooting ranges surrounded by defensive barriers and warning signs. Few people knew of its existence, and fewer still had authorization to enter. Sarah Chun was waiting in the armory, field stripping a rifle with practiced efficiency. Her movements were economical and precise, each action serving a specific purpose. She looked up as Jake entered, offering a brief nod of acknowledgement. "Commander Morrison," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Jake couldn't place. "I've reviewed the mission parameters. The positioning is challenging, but manageable." Jake was struck by her directness. No small talk, no attempts to establish rapport, just professional assessment of the tactical situation. It reminded him of the most competent operators he had worked with, people who understood that survival depended on focusing on what mattered. "What's your assessment of the Overwatch position?" Jake asked, spreading a topographical map across the workbench. Sarah pointed to a ridge line northeast of the target compound. "Here, elevation advantage of approximately 300 meters, clear fields of fire to primary and secondary extraction routes. Wind patterns are favorable, and there's natural concealment among the rock formations." Her finger traced potential lines of sight with the confidence of someone who had studied the terrain extensively. Jake noticed her hands were steady despite the stress of preparing for a dangerous mission. Many operators, even experienced ones, showed subtle signs of nervousness before combat operations. "Range to target?" Jake questioned. 940 meters to the compound's main building, extending to 1,200 meters for the furthest extraction point, Sarah replied without hesitation. "Well within effective range for precision fire." Jake nodded, impressed by her preparation. The distances she quoted matched his own calculations exactly, suggesting she had thoroughly analyzed the mission requirements. But technical competence was only part of what made an effective sniper. The mental aspects were equally important. "Have you worked with SEAL teams before?" Jake asked. "Not directly," Sarah admitted, "but I provided support for similar operations. Different units, same principles. Communication, coordination, and trust." The word trust hung in the air between them. Jake knew his team would be depending on someone they had never worked with before, someone whose reactions under pressure remained unknown. Combat had a way of revealing character, both good and bad. "My team has concerns about working with an unknown asset," Jake said carefully. "No reflection on your abilities, but we've never operated together." Sarah paused in her rifle maintenance, meeting his gaze directly. "Commander, I understand their concerns. If our positions were reversed, I would have the same reservations. But I can promise you this, I will not let your people down." Something in her tone convinced Jake that she meant every word. There was a quiet intensity about her, a sense of someone who had faced difficult situations and emerged stronger. He found himself believing that she would indeed keep her promise. The remainder of the afternoon was spent reviewing communication procedures, emergency protocols, and contingency plans. Sarah asked intelligent questions about team movements, timing, and potential complications. Her tactical understanding was sophisticated, suggesting extensive experience with complex operations. As evening approached, Jake felt more confident about the mission. Sarah Chun might be an unknown quantity, but her professionalism and preparation were evident. His team would still have reservations, but those would likely fade once they saw her capabilities in action. The final briefing took place just after sunset, with Sarah joining the SEAL team for the first time. The initial tension was palpable, but it gradually eased as she demonstrated her knowledge of the mission and her understanding of their procedures. By the end of the session, even the most skeptical team members seemed convinced of her competence. "Insertion is at 0200 hours, Jake announced. "Overwatch in position by 0300. Main team advances on target at 0400. Questions? There were none. Each person understood their role and responsibilities. Sarah would helicopter to her position separately, establishing Overwatch and communications before the main team began their approach. If everything went according to plan, they would complete their reconnaissance and extract before dawn without firing a shot. But Jake had learned long ago that military operations rarely proceeded according to plan. Variables always emerged, situations changed, and adaptability often meant the difference between success and failure. As he looked around the room at his team and their civilian sniper support, he hoped they were prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. The next few hours would test them all in ways none of them could fully anticipate. In a remote valley in Afghanistan, a young woman with no official recognition would prove that heroism sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources, and that the most important battles are often the ones that never appear in official records. The helicopter's rotors cut through the cold mountain air as Sarah Chun checked her equipment one final time. Her rifle case lay secured beside her, containing the precision instrument that had become an extension of herself over years of dangerous missions. The crew chief held up 2 fingers, indicating 2 minutes to the drop zone. Sarah's mind was clear and focused, the way it always became before stepping into harm's way. She had learned to quiet the noise of doubt and fear, channeling all her energy into the task ahead. Tonight, 6 Navy SEALs would depend on her skills to keep them alive in hostile territory. The helicopter touched down briefly on a rocky outcrop, just long enough for Sarah to jump out with her gear before disappearing back into the darkness. She was alone now, 12,000 feet above sea level in Taliban-controlled mountains, with nothing but her training and determination to rely on. Moving carefully through the rocky terrain, Sarah made her way to the predetermined overwatch position. The approach took 40 minutes of careful climbing, testing each foothold and avoiding loose stones that might signal her presence to enemy sentries below. Her breathing was controlled despite the altitude and physical exertion. The sniper's nest she had selected offered perfect concealment among natural rock formations while providing clear fields of fire across the target area. Sarah set up her rifle with methodical precision, adjusting the bipod legs and checking the scope's alignment. Every movement was practiced and deliberate, honed through countless hours of training and real-world experience. Overwatch in position, she whispered into her radio, using the predetermined code phrase. The response came immediately from Commander Morrison, acknowledging her successful insertion. Phase 1 of the mission was complete. Below in the valley, the Taliban compound appeared quiet in the pre-dawn darkness. Intelligence reports suggested it housed a cell of foreign fighters planning attacks on coalition forces. Sarah's job was to observe, document, and provide protection for the SEAL team conducting close reconnaissance. Through her high-powered scope, Sarah began cataloging details of the compound's layout and security measures. Guard positions, patrol routes, defensive barriers, and potential escape routes were all carefully noted. This intelligence would prove valuable whether the mission proceeded smoothly or complications arose. At 0400 hours, she spotted movement in the rocks below her position. 6 figures dressed in dark tactical gear were advancing toward the compound with the fluid precision of elite operators. Commander Morrison's team was beginning their approach, moving like shadows across the broken terrain. Sarah adjusted her scope's focus, tracking the team's progress while simultaneously monitoring the compound for signs of enemy activity. Her role required splitting attention between multiple priorities, protecting the advancing SEALs while gathering intelligence on their primary target. Everything was proceeding according to plan when Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through her scope, she observed a Taliban fighter emerging from a concealed position that intelligence had missed. The enemy combatant was armed with a radio and appeared to be conducting routine security checks. If the fighter spotted the advancing SEAL team, he would alert the entire compound. The Americans would be trapped in open ground with limited cover, facing overwhelming odds. Sarah faced a split-second decision that would determine whether 6 men lived or died. The range was 860 meters, a challenging shot under ideal conditions, nearly impossible in darkness with a moving target. But Sarah had made similar shots before, and the lives of the SEAL team depended on her success. She controlled her breathing, calculated wind speed and direction, and settled the crosshairs on her target. The suppressed rifle's muzzle flash was barely visible in the darkness. 860 meters away, the Taliban fighter dropped without making a sound. His radio clattered against the rocks, but there was no one nearby to hear it fall. Sarah had eliminated the threat before it could compromise the mission. "Threat neutralized," Sarah whispered into her radio. Commander Morrison's acknowledgement was brief, but filled with gratitude. The SEAL team continued their advance, unaware of how close they had come to walking into an ambush. For the next 2 hours, Sarah maintained overwatch as the SEALs conducted their reconnaissance. Through her scope, she observed them photographing documents, collecting equipment samples, and mapping the compound's layout. The intelligence they gathered would help prevent future attacks on American forces. But as dawn approached, the situation began to deteriorate. Early morning prayers would soon bring the compound's occupants outside, making the SEALs' presence impossible to conceal. The team needed to extract immediately, but their planned route had been compromised by increased enemy patrol activity. Sarah watched through her scope as Taliban fighters emerged from several buildings, more than intelligence estimates had predicted. The compound housed at least 40 combatants, far exceeding the expected 20. Commander Morrison's team was outnumbered and would face significant resistance during extraction. "Multiple hostiles, estimate 40 plus," Sarah reported quietly. "Primary extraction route compromised. Recommend alternate route Alpha." The alternate route would take the SEALs through more difficult terrain, but offered better concealment from enemy observation. However, it also brought them closer to Sarah's position, creating new challenges for maintaining overwatch while remaining concealed herself. As the SEAL team began moving toward the alternate extraction point, Sarah spotted another problem. A Taliban patrol was moving to intercept them, having apparently noticed signs of the Americans' presence. 6 enemy fighters were approaching from the east, armed with automatic weapons and moving with tactical discipline. The mathematics were simple and deadly. 6 SEALs against 6 Taliban fighters might seem like even odds, but the Americans were carrying heavy equipment and moving through unfamiliar terrain. The Taliban had the advantage of knowing the ground and fighting on their home territory. Sarah found herself facing an impossible choice. Engaging multiple targets would reveal her position and bring the entire compound's attention to her hiding place. But allowing the patrol to intercept the SEAL team would likely result in American casualties. She made her decision with the cold calculation of a professional warrior. The SEAL team's survival took priority over her own safety. Sarah began engaging the Taliban patrol with rapid, precise shots that eliminated threats while conserving ammunition for the running battle she knew was coming. Her first shot dropped the patrol leader at 900 meters. The second eliminated the machine gunner before he could set up his weapon. The remaining 4 fighters took cover, confused by the direction of incoming fire and unable to locate the sniper's position. This gave Commander Morrison's team the opening they needed to reach better cover among the rocky outcroppings. But Sarah's muzzle flashes had been spotted by sentries at the compound, and return fire was beginning to impact around her position. She had bought the SEALs precious time, but at the cost of her own concealment. Overwatch compromised, taking fire, Sarah reported calmly despite bullets striking the rocks around her. Continue extraction. I'll provide cover as long as possible. The next 20 minutes became a deadly game of cat and mouse among the mountain peaks. Sarah moved constantly, changing positions to avoid concentrated fire while continuing to engage targets, threatening the SEAL team's withdrawal. Her precise shooting kept enemy heads down, allowing the Americans to bound between covered positions toward their extraction point. But the odds were becoming increasingly desperate. Taliban fighters were converging on both the escaping SEALs and Sarah's general area. Ammunition was running low, and enemy pressure was intensifying with each passing minute. What had begun as a quiet reconnaissance mission had become a running firefight against overwhelming numbers. Sarah knew she was probably going to die on this mountain. The thought brought neither fear nor regret. only determination to ensure the SEAL team's survival. She had made her choice when she picked up a rifle in service of her country, accepting that some missions might require the ultimate sacrifice. As bullets continued to strike around her position, Sarah chambered another round and searched for her next target. 6 American warriors were counting on her skills to get them home alive. She would not let them down, no matter the cost to herself. The battle was far from over, but Sarah Chun had already proven something that would never appear in official records. Heroism was not about recognition or reward. It was about doing what was right when everything was wrong, standing firm when others might flee, and protecting those who depended on you regardless of personal consequences. The mountain valley echoed with gunfire as Sarah Chun moved between rock formations, her rifle tracking targets with deadly precision. Each shot was calculated, purposeful, designed to keep the pursuing Taliban fighters away from the escaping SEAL team. But ammunition was running dangerously low, and enemy pressure was intensifying. Through her scope, Sarah watched Commander Morrison's team bound between covered positions, making steady progress toward their extraction point. The alternate route was working, but barely. Taliban fighters seemed to emerge from every shadow, their local knowledge of the terrain giving them significant advantages in the pursuit. Sarah's radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "Overwatch, we're taking heavy fire from the south. Can you suppress that position?" Looking through her scope, Sarah identified the threat immediately. 3 Taliban fighters had positioned themselves behind a stone wall, using automatic weapons to pin down the advancing SEALs. The range was over 1,000 meters, at the very edge of her rifle's effective distance, but she had no choice. Her first shot struck the wall inches from the nearest fighter's head, sending stone fragments into his face and forcing him to take cover. The second shot found its mark, eliminating the machine gunner whose sustained fire had been the primary threat. The third fighter abandoned his position, unwilling to face the invisible sniper's deadly accuracy. "Threat suppressed," Sarah reported, already searching for new targets. The firefight had been going on for 30 minutes, and her ammunition supply was approaching critical levels. Every shot now had to count, because there might not be many left. The SEAL team continued their tactical withdrawal, but Sarah could see they were being gradually surrounded. Taliban reinforcements were arriving from multiple directions, and the Americans' ammunition was also running low after the extended engagement. The extraction helicopter wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. That was when Sarah made a decision that would define her character forever. Instead of conserving her remaining ammunition for personal protection, she began engaging every target that threatened the SEAL team's escape route. Shot after shot rang out from her concealed position, each one precisely placed to maximum effect. A sniper on a distant ridge fell before he could target the Americans. Machine gun crews were eliminated before they could establish effective fire positions. Individual fighters advancing on the SEALs found themselves under accurate fire from an enemy they couldn't locate or effectively engage. But Sarah's aggressive fire support came at a terrible cost. The Taliban had triangulated her general position and were closing in from multiple directions. She was forced to move constantly, abandoning carefully prepared positions to avoid being overrun by superior numbers. Her radio crackled again. "Overwatch, extract immediately. We can make it on our own from here." Sarah looked through her scope at the SEAL team's position. They were still 800 meters from the extraction point, with at least 20 Taliban fighters between them and safety. Morrison was trying to save her life, but his team would never survive without continued sniper support. "Negative," Sarah replied calmly. "You still need Overwatch. Continue extraction." She fired her last 3 rounds in rapid succession, dropping 2 fighters who had been flanking the SEALs and forcing a third to take cover. The bolt locked back on an empty chamber, and Sarah realized she had no more ammunition for her primary weapon. But the SEAL team was still in danger, still depending on her protection. Drawing her sidearm, Sarah began moving closer to the action. The pistol's shorter range meant she would have to get dangerously close to be effective, but there was no alternative. 6 American warriors needed her help, and she would provide it regardless of personal risk. The next 10 minutes became a desperate close-quarters battle among the rocky terrain. Sarah used every piece of cover available, moving like a ghost through the Taliban fighters who were focused on pursuing the escaping SEALs. Her pistol cracked repeatedly, each shot carefully aimed and devastatingly effective at close range. She eliminated a fighter preparing to throw a grenade at the Americans. Another fell before he could radio the SEAL's position to his comrades. A third dropped as he tried to set up an ambush along their escape route. Sarah was running on pure adrenaline and determination, pushing her body and mind beyond normal human limits. But the odds were simply too great. A Taliban fighter she hadn't seen put a burst of automatic fire into her position, striking Sarah in the shoulder and spinning her around behind a boulder. The wound was serious, but not immediately fatal, though blood was flowing freely from the injury. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Sarah checked her pistol's magazine. 4 rounds remaining. Not many, but enough to continue the fight a little longer. The SEAL team was close to their extraction point now, but they still faced resistance from the remaining Taliban forces. Through sheer force of will, Sarah continued engaging targets despite her wound. Each shot required tremendous effort as her strength faded, but her accuracy remained deadly. 2 more Taliban fighters fell to her precise marksmanship before she was forced to reload her final magazine. Her radio crackled one last time with Morrison's voice. Overwatch, helicopter inbound, 2 minutes out. Mark your position for extraction. Sarah looked at her tactical situation and made a brutal calculation. She was surrounded by enemy fighters, seriously wounded and nearly out of ammunition. Any extraction attempt would put the helicopter and its crew at significant risk. More importantly, it would delay the SEAL team's escape and potentially compromise their safety. Negative on extraction, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the pain and exhaustion. Get your people out. Mission accomplished. She could hear the protest in Morrison's voice as he tried to argue, but Sarah had already made her choice. The mission's success and the SEAL team's survival were more important than her personal safety. This was what she had trained for, what she had dedicated her life to achieving. The extraction helicopter appeared over the ridge, its rotors thundering through the mountain air. Sarah watched through failing vision as the SEAL team reached the landing zone and climbed aboard. They were safe now, mission accomplished, intelligence gathered that would save other American lives in future operations. As the helicopter disappeared into the distance, Sarah found herself alone on the mountain with her enemies closing in. Her ammunition was exhausted, her strength fading, but her mission was complete. 6 American warriors were alive because of her actions, heading home to families and futures that her sacrifice had preserved. The Taliban fighters found her position an hour later, but by then, it was too late to pursue the escaped Americans. Sarah Chun had given everything in service of her country and her fellow warriors, asking for nothing in return except the knowledge that she had done her duty. Official records would list her death as a vehicle accident, a civilian contractor killed while performing routine duties. There would be no Medal of Honor, no public recognition, no acknowledgement of her heroism. But 6 Navy SEALs knew the truth about what happened on that mountain, and they would carry that knowledge with them for the rest of their lives. In the end, true heroism was not about recognition or reward. It was about standing firm when everything was falling apart, protecting others regardless of personal cost, and doing what was right because it was right. Sarah Chun had exemplified these qualities in her final hours, proving that character was revealed not in comfortable moments, but in the crucible of impossible choices. The mountain fell silent as the sun rose over Afghanistan, but the echoes of her courage would resonate through the lives she had saved and the missions that her sacrifice had made possible. Sometimes the most important victories were the ones that never appeared in history books, fought by heroes whose names were known only to God and the people they had died to protect. 3 years later, Commander Jake Morrison stood in the Pentagon's basement archives, searching through classified mission reports that few people would ever read. The bureaucratic language of official documents could never capture the reality of what had happened on that Afghan mountain, but Jake felt compelled to ensure some record existed of Sarah Chen's sacrifice. The official after-action report was a masterpiece of military bureaucracy, describing a routine reconnaissance mission that achieved all objectives with minimal enemy contact. Sarah's death was mentioned in a single paragraph as an unrelated vehicle accident that occurred during the same time period. No connection was made between the two events. Jake had written multiple letters requesting recognition for Sarah's actions, each one disappearing into the military's administrative maze without generating any response. Her civilian contractor status created legal complications, and the classified nature of the mission made public recognition impossible. It seemed that bureaucracy would succeed where the Taliban had failed, erasing Sarah Chun from history. But Jake refused to give up. He had made a promise to himself during that helicopter ride home, watching his wounded teammates receive medical treatment while knowing that Sarah Chun lay dead on a mountain because of her devotion to their safety. That promise drove him to continue fighting for her recognition, even when official channels proved futile. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, the team's senior enlisted man, had been quietly documenting Sarah's actions through unofficial channels. His detailed account, written for his personal records, provided a compelling narrative of her heroism that official reports had deliberately obscured. "Sir," Williams said during a private meeting in Jake's office, "I've been thinking about Chen's family. They deserve to know what really happened. Maybe not the classified details, but they should know she died a hero." Jake had been thinking the same thing. Sarah's parents lived in California, where her father worked as an engineer and her mother taught elementary school. They believed their daughter had died in an accident while working for a construction company in Afghanistan. The truth was both simpler and more complex than they knew. After months of legal research and careful consultation with military lawyers, Jake found a way to approach Sarah's family without violating security regulations. He could not discuss classified mission details, but he could share general information about her service and sacrifice. It wasn't much, but it was something. The meeting took place in a small coffee shop near Sarah's hometown. Her parents, David and Lin Shun, arrived early and sat nervously at a corner table. They knew Jake was a military officer who had served with their daughter, but they didn't understand why he wanted to meet with them. Jake was struck by how much Sarah had resembled her mother. Lin Shun had the same serious dark eyes and determined expression that had characterized their daughter. David Chun was a quiet man whose gentle manner contrasted with his daughter's warrior spirit. But Jake could see where Sarah had inherited her sense of duty and commitment. "Mr. and Mrs. Chun," Jake began carefully, "I wanted you to know that your daughter was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with. Her actions saved American lives, and she died serving her country with honor." The words seemed inadequate to capture Sarah's heroism, but they were all Jake could offer without violating security regulations. He watched as the parents processed this information, realizing for the first time that their daughter's death had meaning beyond a random accident. "We knew she was proud of her military service," Lin Shin said quietly. "But the company that employed her said she was just doing construction work. We never understood why she would take such a dangerous job." Jake wished he could tell them everything. How Sarah had single-handedly held off dozens of enemy fighters. How her sacrifice had enabled 6 SEALs to complete their mission and return home safely. How her courage under impossible odds had exemplified the very best of military service. But security classifications prevented him from sharing those details. Instead, he offered something else. "Your daughter volunteered for dangerous assignments because she believed in protecting others. She could have taken safer jobs, but she chose to put herself at risk for the sake of her fellow service members. That takes a special kind of person." David Chin leaned forward, his engineer's mind seeking concrete details. "Can you tell us anything about what she did? How she helped people?" "She provided protection for other service members during dangerous operations," Jake replied carefully. "She was extremely skilled at her job, and her teammates trusted her completely. When situations became difficult, she never hesitated to put others' safety before her own. It was the truth, if not the complete truth. Jake could see that Sarah's parents found some comfort in knowing their daughter had died meaningfully, even if they couldn't know the full extent of her heroism. Sometimes partial truth was the best that circumstances allowed. After the meeting, Jake continued his efforts to secure some form of official recognition for Sarah. The process was slow and frustrating, involving multiple government agencies and countless bureaucratic obstacles. But Jake had learned patience during his military career, and he was determined to achieve some measure of justice for Sarah's memory. The solution came through an unexpected channel. A senior Defense Department official, himself a former Special Operations officer, understood the importance of recognizing heroism even when public acknowledgement was impossible. He helped arrange for Sarah's name to be added to a classified memorial that honored fallen warriors whose sacrifices could not be publicly recognized. The memorial ceremony took place at a secure facility outside Washington, attended by a small group of officials and Sarah's former teammates. There were no media cameras, no public speeches, no flag-draped coffin. Just a simple acknowledgement of sacrifice that would never be widely known, but would be remembered by those who mattered. Jake stood before the memorial wall, reading Sarah's name among dozens of others who had given their lives in classified operations. The inscription was simple, in memory of those who served in silence and gave all in defense of freedom. It wasn't much, but it was more than Sarah had received before. As the ceremony concluded, Jake found himself standing beside Sergeant Martinez, who had been wounded during their extraction from Afghanistan. The young SEAL was walking with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of that mountain firefight, but he was alive because of Sarah Chen's sacrifice. "She saved all our lives that day," Martinez said quietly. "I think about her every time I see my kids. My daughter's first steps, my son's baseball games, none of that would have happened without Chun." That was Sarah's true legacy, Jake realized. Not medals or official recognition, but the lives she had preserved and the future she had made possible. 6 SEALs had returned home because of her courage, and their families had been spared the devastating grief of losing loved ones. The children who would be born, the accomplishments yet to be achieved, the love yet to be shared, all of it existed because one woman had chosen duty over personal safety. Years later, when Jake retired from the Navy and began teaching at the Naval War College, he would often discuss the nature of heroism with his students. He would explain that true courage was not about recognition or reward, but about doing what was right when everything was wrong. He would describe how the most important battles were often fought by people whose names would never appear in history books. He never mentioned Sarah Chan by name. Security regulations still prevented that, but he would speak about the kind of person who embodied military values at their highest level. Someone who understood that service meant sacrifice, that duty transcended personal interest, and that the welfare of others was worth any personal cost. Sometimes students would ask if such people really existed, or if they were just idealized figures from military mythology. Jake would smile and assure them that such heroes were very real, walking among them every day, ready to step forward when circumstances demanded extraordinary courage. On quiet evenings, Jake would sometimes visit that simple grave in Arlington Cemetery, standing before a headstone that bore no military rank or decorations. To casual observers, it was just another civilian grave among thousands of others. But Jake knew better. He knew that beneath that ordinary marker lay someone who had embodied the warrior spirit in its purest form. The inscription was simple: Sarah Chun, beloved daughter. It said nothing about her military service, her heroism, or her sacrifice. But for Jake Morrison and 5 other Navy SEALs, it marked the resting place of the finest soldier they had ever known. In the end, that recognition was enough. Heroes did not serve for praise or reward, but for the simple satisfaction of duty fulfilled and honor preserved. Sarah Chun had found that satisfaction on a mountain in Afghanistan, proving that true heroism lived not in the history books, but in the hearts of those whose lives have been touched by uncommon courage. Her legacy would endure as long as there were people willing to sacrifice for others. And her example would inspire future generations of warriors to choose service over self.